I sit at the plaintiff's table, hands folded over a manila folder that contains 6 months of careful work. Across the aisle, Victoria leans into Brendan's shoulder, whispering something that makes him squeeze her hand. They're wearing complementary colors, her navy dress, his gray suit, like they coordinated this morning over coffee in that kitchen that used to be half mine. The bailiff calls the room to order and everyone stands, but I'm watching her face, looking for the exact moment she notices my attorney sliding a second briefcase onto our table. She doesn't see it yet. She's too busy performing. Judge Morrison settles into her seat, bifocals catching the fluorescent light. She's heard 1,000 custody cases, seen 1,000 couples who once promised forever now fighting over holiday schedules, and who keeps the sectional sofa. Victoria's attorney, a man named Paulson who wears expensive watches and practiced empathy, rises first. He paints her as the stable parent, the one who maintained consistency while I withdrew from family obligations. He references her established home in Meadowbrook, her consistent work schedule, the support system she's built, carefully avoiding the word boyfriend and using partner instead, as if semantic choices erase timelines. Brendan nods along, his jaw set in that protective way men adopt when they believe they're defending something righteous. He has no idea what's coming. Neither does she, really, though I catch her glancing at me twice, trying to read my expression. I give her nothing. My attorney, Helen Ortiz, keeps her opening brief. She simply states that evidence will demonstrate a pattern of misrepresentation regarding both asset disclosure and parenting time, and that documentation will speak for itself. Victoria's lips tighten. Just slightly. The first witness is supposed to be her character reference, Brendan's sister, who barely knows our daughter but will testify to Victoria's nurturing presence at family gatherings. But Helen stands and requests to call a preliminary witness, given new information that directly impacts custody evaluation. Judge Morrison raises an eyebrow but allows it. Paulson objects on procedural grounds, his voice climbing half an octave. The judge overrules him. Helen calls Jessica Brennan to the stand. I watch Victoria's face drain. Jessica, her former coworker, the woman who covered her Thursday client dinners for 8 months, who knew about Brendan before I did, who finally couldn't live with a lie anymore. Jessica walks to the witness stand in a gray cardigan, hands trembling slightly as she's sworn in. She doesn't look at Victoria. She looks at the court reporter, at the flag behind the judge's bench, anywhere but at the woman she once called her closest friend. Brendan leans forward, confused. He whispers something to Victoria. She shakes her head, mouth forming words I can't hear from here, but her hand has moved from his to her lap, fingers knotted together. Judge Morrison asks Helen to proceed. And that's when I let myself exhale. Not in relief, not yet, but in recognition. The truth doesn't always win immediately. Sometimes it waits for the right room, the right witness, the right question. Sometimes justice is just patience with a filing deadline. Ms. Brennan, Helen begins, how long have you known the respondent, Victoria Hayes? 12 years, Jessica says quietly. We started at Nordex Pharma the same week. And are you familiar with her relationship to Mr. Brendan Porter? Yes. Jessica's voice steadies. I am. Victoria closes her eyes. It started with Thursdays. Victoria had always worked late occasionally, but around March of last year, Thursday nights became sacred. Regional sales meetings, she said. Team strategy sessions that ran until 9, sometimes 10. I'd pick up our daughter Lily from aftercare, make dinner, handle bath time, read stories about talking animals and brave children. When Victoria came home, she'd be tired but energized in a way I couldn't place, like exhaustion mixed with something brighter, more electric. I didn't question it. Why would I? We'd been married 9 years. She'd built her career while I'd supported it, rearranging my schedule when she traveled, covering school events when she had client dinners. Marriage isn't 50-50 every day. Sometimes it's 80-20, and you trust the balance evens out over time. But then came the small inconsistencies. Her phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, now accompanied her to every room. She started showering immediately after arriving home on Thursdays, saying the conference rooms at work were stuffy, made her feel grimy. New clothes appeared in her closet, not dramatic, just newer, more fitted. When I complimented a blouse I hadn't seen before, she said she'd had it for months, her tone suggesting I simply didn't pay attention. Maybe I didn't. Or maybe I was paying attention to the wrong things. In June, she went to a pharma conference in Phoenix. 3 days, she said. I handled everything at home, Lily's dental appointment, a school project about butterflies, the daily architecture of our life together. Victoria called once each evening, conversations brief, background noise suggesting hotel lobbies and restaurant patios. She came back with conference swag and stories about keynote speakers. I believed all of it. 2 weeks later, I ran into Derek Simmons at the grocery store. Derek's wife worked at Nordex with Victoria. We chatted in the produce section, the meaningless exchanges of friendly acquaintances, until he mentioned hoping the Phoenix heat hadn't been too brutal. I agreed it probably was. He said his wife came back exhausted, that the Tempe Convention Center was apparently undergoing renovations so everything felt chaotic. I nodded, pushed my cart toward the registers, and felt something cold settle in my chest. The Phoenix conference had been in Tempe. Victoria's name badge, sitting on her dresser for a week after she returned, said Scottsdale Marriott. I didn't confront her. Not then. Instead, I started noticing other things. The way she angled her phone screen away when texting. How Thursday meetings sometimes shifted to Wednesdays, always with the same vague explanation about scheduling conflicts. The lipstick shade she wore on those nights, bolder than what she chose for actual client meetings. I learned about Brendan through Jessica, though not because Jessica wanted to tell me. We'd all gone to a Nordex summer barbecue, spouses included, kids running through sprinklers, colleagues drinking craft beer and pretending to enjoy each other outside office hours. Jessica's husband mentioned that Victoria had been working out at that new CrossFit gym on Palmer Street, the one his brother managed. Said she'd been going for months, really committed to it. Victoria never mentioned a gym. She'd made jokes about my suggestion we join one together just last winter. I watched her that afternoon, surrounded by coworkers who laughed at her stories, who saw the version of herself she wanted to project. And I realized I'd become a supporting character in her life, useful for childcare and mortgage payments, but not central to whatever narrative she was writing for herself. When she caught me looking, she smiled and raised her beer bottle in a small toast across the yard. That night, I checked our credit card statements. 6 months of charges at Apex CrossFit. Always on Thursday evenings. Never mentioned once. I slept in the guest room for the first time that night, claiming a pulled muscle in my back. She didn't ask why. I stopped asking questions. That was the first change. When Victoria came home late, I didn't inquire about her day. When she mentioned needing the car on Saturday for errands, I simply handed her the keys. Silence, I learned, is its own kind of power. It unnerves people who expect resistance. She'd brace herself for accusations that never came, and in that space, she'd fill it with more lies, each one another brick in the wall I was building between us. I moved through our home like a guest. Made coffee for one. Cooked meals Lily and I would eat together while Victoria worked late. I started documenting everything in a composition notebook I kept in my desk drawer at work. Dates, times, inconsistencies. Thursday, July 18th, said she'd be home by 8 p.m., arrived at 10:47 p.m., shirt buttoned wrong. Wednesday, July 24th, claimed conference call with West Coast team, but her laptop was closed and cold when I walked past her office at 9:15 p.m. I wrote it all down in plain language, no emotion, just facts that could be verified. My coworker Raj noticed the change first. We'd have lunch in the break room and he'd ask how things were, the way people do when they're not really asking. Fine, I'd say. Everything's fine. But one afternoon I must have looked less convincing because he set down his sandwich and said, "You know my sister's a family attorney, right? If you ever need a name." I folded that information away like everything else, another piece of preparation for something I wasn't ready to name yet. At home, I became efficient. I started handling all of Lily's school communications, making sure I was copied on every email from her teacher. I documented every pickup, every drop-off, every parent-teacher conference Victoria missed because of work. I photographed Lily's artwork before it went on the fridge, time-stamped images of us at the park, the zoo, the library. Not for sentimentality, for evidence. I was building a case I didn't fully understand yet, driven by instinct more than strategy. Victoria seemed relieved by my withdrawal. The less I asked, the more freedom she assumed. She stopped crafting elaborate explanations for her absences. Thursday nights became Friday date nights with the girls from work. Weekend errands stretched into afternoons. She was still careful, never obvious, never careless enough to leave direct evidence, but she was also growing confident in my apparent obliviousness. I consulted Raj's sister in August. Her office was in a converted house downtown, the kind of place with creaking floors and mismatched furniture that somehow felt more trustworthy than corporate glass towers. Patricia Chen listened without interrupting while I laid out 6 months of documented patterns. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and asked one question: "What do you want?" I didn't know how to answer that. I wanted my marriage to be what I thought it was. I wanted to rewind to before Thursdays became code for betrayal. But those weren't options anymore, so I said, I want to protect my daughter. And I want the truth to matter. Patricia nodded. Then we document everything. Financial records, parenting time, any evidence of cohabitation or relationship overlap with divorce proceedings. We don't make accusations, we present facts and let them speak. She slid a retainer agreement across her desk. This won't be quick, and it won't feel good. But if you want truth to matter in family court, you have to be meticulous. I signed the paperwork that afternoon. The next 3 months were mechanical. I opened a separate bank account and redirected my paycheck. I found a 2-bedroom apartment on Fletcher Street and signed a lease that wouldn't start until I filed for divorce. I collected pay stubs, tax returns, mortgage statements. Patricia requested Victoria's financial disclosures through informal discovery, which she provided with annoyed compliance, never suspecting why we needed them. I photographed every asset in our home, furniture, electronics, Lily's toys, creating an inventory that could be referenced later. At night, I'd sit in the home office after Victoria went to bed, organizing files on my laptop. Bank statements showing charges at restaurants I'd never been to. Cell phone records Patricia had subpoenaed showing hundreds of texts to a number registered to Brendan Porter. Social media posts Victoria had made about date nights on evenings I'd been home with Lily. Each piece of evidence was a small, cold comfort, proof I wasn't imagining things, that my instincts had been right. I filed for divorce on a Tuesday in November. Victoria received the papers at work, served by a process server who found her in the Nordex parking lot. She called me 17 times that afternoon. I didn't answer. Patricia had advised me not to engage outside of documented communication. Let the lawyers talk, she'd said. You focus on being the parent your daughter needs. So I did. I picked Lily up from school, made her favorite pasta, and helped her practice spelling words for Friday's test. When she asked where Mommy was, I said she had to work late. It wasn't even a lie anymore. Patricia's office became my second home that winter. We met every Tuesday evening after I put Lily to bed at my sister's place, spreading documents across her conference table like generals planning a campaign. She taught me to think in terms of evidence chains, how one bank statement connected to a credit card charge, which connected to a location timestamp, which connected to witness testimony. Nothing existed in isolation. Every piece of the puzzle had to lock into another. She'll come in confident, Patricia said during one of these sessions, highlighting a section of Victoria's financial disclosure. Women like your wife, they're used to controlling narratives. She'll have practiced her story, rehearsed it with Brendan, maybe even with her attorney. She'll paint herself as the devoted mother who held everything together while you emotionally abandoned the family. Patricia looked up from the documents. Our job isn't to fight her story with your story. It's to make her story collapse under its own contradictions. We identified 3 pressure points. First, the timeline. Victoria claimed in her initial filing that our marriage had been irretrievably broken for over 2 years, suggesting a long, mutual decline. But I had evidence of anniversary dinners, family vacations, her birthday posts on social media calling me her rock and best friend, all dated within 18 months of her filing. Patricia filed a motion to compel her to provide detailed explanations for these inconsistencies, forcing her to either admit the timeline was false or explain why she was publicly celebrating a marriage she claimed was dead. Second, the financial picture. Victoria had requested primary custody and corresponding child support, claiming she'd always been Lily's primary caregiver. But her own work calendar, which we'd subpoenaed, showed 73 days of travel in the past year. Her expense reports documented dinners and hotel stays in cities where Nordex had no clients or offices. Meanwhile, my employer provided documentation showing I'd used flex time and remote work options specifically to handle school pickups, doctor appointments, and sick days. I had teacher emails thanking me for volunteering at classroom events Victoria had missed. I had time-stamped photos covering months of solo parenting while she built her new life. Third, and most delicate, the cohabitation issue. Victoria listed her residence as the Meadowbrook townhouse she'd moved into after I filed. What she didn't disclose was that Brendan Porter owned the unit next door, and that the interior wall between them had been removed 6 weeks after she moved in, turning 2 townhouses into 1 residence. Patricia hired a private investigator who documented this through public records and photographs. The modification permit had been filed jointly under both their names. They were, legally speaking, cohabitating, which affected everything from custody arrangements to her claim of needing financial support. Here's what they don't know, Patricia said, organizing our evidence binders by category. They think you're still the man who didn't notice Thursday nights. They think you're going to show up emotional, defensive, easy to rattle on the stand. They've built their case around that assumption. She clicked the final binder shut. We're going to let them keep thinking that right up until it matters. We prepared witness lists. My sister, who'd watched Lily twice a week for the past year and could testify to the consistency of my parenting. Lily's teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, who could speak to which parent attended conferences and volunteered for field trips. Derek Simmons' wife from Nordex, who could confirm that Victoria's travel schedule often didn't match the company's actual conference calendar. And Jessica Brennan, Victoria's former friend and coworker, the one who'd finally reached out to Patricia's office after months of guilt about staying silent. Jessica's testimony would be the turning point. She'd covered for Victoria, lied to me directly, participated in the deception. But she had a daughter Lily's age, and watching our family disintegrate while knowing the truth had become unbearable. Patricia spent hours preparing her, making sure she understood that her testimony wasn't about betraying a friend. It was about telling the truth in a legal proceeding where a child's welfare hung in the balance. Brendan doesn't know any of this, I said during our final preparation meeting, the night before the hearing. He thinks he's the good guy in this story. Patricia nodded. Men like him usually do. He believes he rescued her from a bad marriage. By the time he realizes what actually happened, that he was dating a married woman who lied to everyone including him about the timeline, he'll already be sitting in that courtroom. His reaction will tell the judge everything she needs to know about Victoria's credibility. I drove home that night with 2 bankers' boxes of evidence in my trunk and a calm I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't going to court to win an argument. I was going to present facts, methodically and without emotion, and let Victoria's own choices speak for themselves. The truth didn't need embellishment. It just needed documentation. Jessica's testimony lasts 40 minutes, but the damage is done in the first 10. She sits with her hands folded, voice steady, and confirms what Patricia already suspected, that Victoria and Brendan's relationship began in February of last year, a full 9 months before Victoria filed for divorce. She describes covering for Victoria's Thursday absences, making excuses to mutual coworkers when someone noticed the pattern. She recounts a specific conversation in the Nordex break room where Victoria showed her a text from Brendan and laughed about how I still believed she was working late. Did Ms. Hayes ever express concern about ending her marriage before beginning this new relationship? Patricia asks. Jessica shakes her head. She said the marriage was already over in her mind. That it didn't matter when she started seeing someone else because she'd emotionally checked out years ago. Jessica's voice drops slightly. But I'd seen them together, her and Theodore, at the company barbecue just a month before. They seemed fine. Normal. Across the aisle, Brendan has gone rigid. His hand is no longer on Victoria's back. He's staring straight ahead, jaw clenched, processing information that contradicts everything she's told him. Victoria whispers something to him urgently, but he doesn't respond. Paulson objects twice during Jessica's testimony, relevance, hearsay, but Judge Morrison overrules both times. The affair's timeline goes directly to credibility, she notes. And Jessica's testimony is based on direct conversation, not speculation. When Patricia finishes, Paulson declines to cross-examine. There's nothing he can ask that won't make things worse. Next comes the financial evidence. Patricia presents Victoria's expense reports alongside her sworn statement claiming primary caregiver status. 73 travel days. Hotel charges in cities with no Nordex presence. A corporate card statement showing a dinner for two at a steakhouse in Austin on a night she told me she was working late at the office. Verified by my own documentation showing I was home with Lily, helping her build a diorama of the solar system. Mr. Hayes, Patricia says, addressing me directly now, can you describe your typical weekday routine during the period your wife claims you were emotionally absent from family responsibilities? I keep my voice level, factual. I'd wake up at 6, make breakfast for Lily, pack her lunch, and drive her to school by 7:30. I worked from home 3 days a week specifically to be available for pickup at 3:15. On days I went to the office, I used flex hours to leave by 2:30. Evenings were homework, dinner, bath time, and bedtime routine. I have documentation of every school event I attended, every doctor's appointment I scheduled, every parent-teacher conference. I pause. Victoria attended 2 parent-teacher conferences in the last year. I attended all 6. Paulson tries to reframe this during cross-examination, suggesting I was overcompensating for guilt about the marriage failing. But Patricia has already submitted Ms. Rodriguez's written statement. Lily's teacher describes me as consistently engaged and present, noting that I was the emergency contact she called first because I always answered and always came immediately. Then Patricia introduces the cohabitation evidence. The property modification permit showing Victoria and Brendan jointly converted 2 townhouses into 1 residence. Utility bills under both names. A doorbell camera screenshot, time-stamped at 6:43 a.m. on a Tuesday, showing Brendan leaving through Victoria's front door in workout clothes, headed next door to his gym. Brendan's face has moved past confusion into something harder. He leans back, creating physical distance from Victoria for the first time all morning. She reaches for his hand, he pulls it away, pretending to adjust his tie. Your Honor, Patricia says, the respondent claimed in her financial affidavit that she maintains a separate residence and requires child support to cover housing costs. The evidence shows she's been cohabitating with Mr. Porter in a shared residence since August, with significant financial entanglement that was never disclosed. This goes directly to her credibility on all financial matters before the court. Judge Morrison makes a note, her expression unreadable but her pen moving with deliberate pressure. Victoria takes the stand for her own defense, and this is where everything unravels. Paulson tries to rehabilitate her testimony, walking her through the emotional neglect narrative, but Patricia's cross-examination is surgical. She doesn't raise her voice, doesn't show anger. She simply presents Victoria with her own words, social media posts, text messages to friends, public declarations of marital happiness, all dated after she claims the marriage was irretrievably broken. Mrs. Hayes, can you explain why you posted this photo on your anniversary, calling your husband, my forever person, if the marriage had been over for years? Victoria stumbles. People post things. It doesn't mean. And this text to your sister, dated March 15, saying you and Theodore were finally in a good place again. That was after you began your relationship with Mr. Porter, correct? I don't remember the exact. The timestamp is on the exhibit, Mrs. Hayes. March 15. 3 weeks after Ms. Brennan testified you started seeing Mr. Porter. Victoria's composure cracks. She tries to explain, to contextualize, but each answer contradicts the previous one. The confident woman who walked in this morning is gone, replaced by someone scrambling to maintain a narrative that's collapsing in real time. Judge Morrison calls a 15-minute recess. When we return, Victoria and Brendan are no longer sitting together. He's moved to the back row of the gallery, arms crossed, face unreadable. Victoria sits alone at her table, Paulson beside her but noticeably leaning away. The judge delivers her ruling without preamble. Joint legal custody, but primary physical custody to me, given the documented consistency of my parenting and questions about Victoria's credibility regarding her availability. Child support is adjusted to reflect actual income and expenses, not the inflated needs Victoria claimed. The marital home will be sold, assets divided according to actual contribution records, not the narrative Victoria presented. I find the respondent's testimony regarding the timeline and nature of the marriage's decline to be inconsistent with documentary evidence, Judge Morrison says. Credibility is central to custody determinations. The petitioner has demonstrated both reliability and transparency throughout these proceedings. Victoria doesn't look at me as we leave. Brendan is already gone. 3 years have passed since that morning in Judge Morrison's courtroom. Lily is 11 now, growing into someone I recognize more each day. Thoughtful, observant, with her mother's quick wit but, I hope, a clearer sense of honesty. She spends weekdays with me and every other weekend with Victoria, who moved to a smaller apartment across town after things ended with Brendan. They lasted 6 months after the hearing. Turns out trust is difficult to rebuild when it starts with lies, even for the person who benefited from them. I don't ask Lily about her mother's life, and she doesn't volunteer much. That's healthy, Patricia told me once. Children shouldn't be messengers between parents. What I know comes from the necessary exchanges, schedule changes, school updates, medical appointments. Victoria is civil now, sometimes almost friendly, as if enough time has passed that we can pretend the war never happened. I don't correct her. There's no point. I still live in the apartment on Fletcher Street, though I've made it home now. Photos of Lily on the walls, her artwork magnetized to the refrigerator, a reading corner where we spend Sunday afternoons working through fantasy novels about dragons and distant kingdoms. I'm dating someone, a woman I met at Lily's soccer games whose son plays goalkeeper. It's early, undefined, but it feels different, built on truth instead of assumptions, on presence instead of performance. Sometimes I see Victoria at school events, sitting in the parent section while Lily performs in band concerts or presents science projects. She looks older, quieter, like someone who's learned that confidence and certainty aren't the same thing. Once, after a spring recital, we ended up walking to our cars at the same time. She asked how I was doing, and I said fine, good actually. She nodded, said she was glad, and there was something in her expression, not quite regret, but maybe recognition. An acknowledgement that we both lived through something that changed us, even if we came out different sides. I don't hate her. That's the truth I've arrived at after years of processing. Hate requires energy I'd rather spend elsewhere, on Lily's homework, on work projects that actually interest me, on building a life that feels honest. What Victoria did was real, and it hurt in ways that took time to heal, but carrying that anger would only mean she still controlled part of my story. Last month, I drove past the courthouse on my way to meet Lily for lunch. The same gray concrete, the same tinted windows, the same flat sunlight that makes everyone look tired. I didn't slow down, didn't feel the need to revisit. That chapter closed the day Judge Morrison signed the custody order. I parked outside the Indian restaurant Lily loves, checked my phone to see if I was early, and realized I was right on time. She was waiting by the entrance, backpack slung over one shoulder, waving when she saw me. I waved back and walked toward her, the afternoon sun warm on my face, and for the first time in years, everything felt exactly as it should.